Nice to meet you folks, and glad that you're here. And we have an interesting tasting. We are going to taste wines of artisanal winemakers. This is a federation of Italian independent winemakers called FIVI. And it's a really interesting association because very high quality producers are part of this association. It was founded only in 2008, and now it's 850 estates strong, so it's really grown by leaps and bounds. And these are basically estates that grow their own grapes and make their own wine and bottle. They might sell some of their produce. They, in particularly difficult years, they might have to acquire some, but in general, it's their own product that they're bottling. They bottle their own wines. And these small estates have also a very important social function because they tend to work the grapes that have long been associated with their territories or terroirs. And so we have, among these 850 estates, many hundreds of different varieties of grapes and many different types of wine. So it really is an excellent way to learn about Italian wine with, again, like I say, some high quality products. Also, you know, these are people who fight for really the good of wine rather than necessarily big business interests, in the sense that, you know, the EU is a union that has to listen to many different voices and many different desires, and you know, some of the things that the EU will do literally don't make much sense, right? You know, if it had been for them, Italy would not have been able to make any more pecorino di fossa, because according to EU standards, it's not healthy to make cheese to let it age in these marble caves. And another thing is Italian cafes could not serve iced tea that they make themselves because that's not healthy either, and you'd be obligated to serve only canned iced tea. And you know, you can read that two ways. On one hand, it's a hygienic thing. On the other hand, is you're forcing people to buy products that are industrially made and maybe not necessarily healthy. So without becoming a Taliban and without wanting to read too much into it, it's at least good to have a group of people who ask questions and who try to figure out why certain laws are being decreed and made, and it's good to, for example, you know, with wine, there are some people who would like to allow bottling wine from a different country with the name of another country. As long as the wine is bottled in that country, you could say it was, for example, made in Italy, even though the juice comes from Bulgaria. And that sort of flies in the face of reason. But there's lots of people who want that to be done because vintages are what they are, and sometimes the country doesn't have much production. So you don't have enough wine to bottle, so what can you do? Well, you can go buy it elsewhere. But you don't want to bottle it as Bulgarian wine because that's cheap, let's say. You want to bottle it as, you know, sexy Italian wine or French wine. And so, you know, those are lots of things that happen, and it's good to have little guys who fight for their traditions and their roots and what they believe in. So FIVI is a member also of the CEVI, C-E-V-I, which is sort of the Confederation of European Independent Vignerons, and many other associations are part of this, French ones, Luxembourg winemakers, Portuguese, Spanish ones like the Bodegas Familiares de Rioja, and the Association de Vignerons Suisse Encadreurs. And so it's an association that's part of a bigger confederation. And like I said, the really great thing about FIVI is that you have these really wonderful wine estates that are part of it. And we have some really great wines here for you today. And some of them really are the best at these wines in Italy. Certainly, I can think of a couple here that have no rivals when it comes to the wines they make. So the first wine we're going to drink is actually a wine that we would usually drink last, but since it's been poured and it's going to warm up, which is a shame, we'll start with it anyways. You have it there on your list. It's Paolo Saracco's Moscato d'Asti, and you all know Moscato. What you don't know is that probably Paolo Saracco is, for many of us, the best producer of Moscato d'Asti in Italy. And it's always hard to say the best because, you know, it's also subjective. So we'll say one of the three best producers by all measures in Italy. Paolo Saracco is really one of the gold standards for Moscato d'Asti. And Saracco actually is an ancient house located in Castiglione Tinella. Castiglione Tinella is one of the grand crus for Moscato production. You know, Moscato d'Asti is the name of the wine. The grape is actually Moscato Bianco, or white muscat, or what they also call Muscat Canelli, or Muscat Petit Grain, small berried muscat. Muscat Canelli, because Canelli is another town in Piedmont, not far from Castiglione Tinella, which is also one of the grand crus for white muscat production. Another town would be Mango, for example. Another one would be Santo Stefano Belbo. These are all grand crus for white muscat production. Castiglione Tinella is characterized by mainly layers of sandy and loamy soils, and white muscat is a very adaptable grape. It can actually live in much warmer environments. It can actually live even in very hot places like Sicily and Puglia. Usually those areas are the home of another muscat called Muscat of Alexandria, Moscato di Alessandria, which in Italy we actually call Zibibbo, very typical muscat of Sicily, especially in Pantelleria, an island off the coast of Sicily. But we have some white muscat, or Moscato Bianco, which is again the same muscat that gives Moscato d'Asti. We have it in Puglia. The wine called Moscato di Trani is actually made with white muscat. It's actually made with Moscato Bianco. Trani is a town on the seashore of Puglia. And the perhaps better known Moscato di Noto in Sicily, and the Moscato di Siracusa, these are names of wines. Moscato di Siracusa and Moscato di Noto are both made with the white muscat grape, which is again the same grape with which you make Moscato d'Asti. So the Saracco estate was founded in 1900 exactly by Luigi Saracco, and it sold all its wine off in bulk. Believe it or not, white muscat was one of the grapes that was used to make vermouth. Vermouth has always been made with lightly aromatic grapes. A big one was Verdeca from Puglia, Bianco d'Alessano, another grape in Puglia, but also white muscat. And Saracco used to sell a lot of his white muscat grapes to Moscato Bianco grapes to vermouth producers. And then it was in 1988 that Paolo Saracco took over the estate and decided to bottle his production with his own label. And that's when the Paolo Saracco estate was born. They have a bunch of different vineyards here, and this is a blend of different vineyards. One's called the Vineyard of Renato because it was owned by a guy called Renato. Another one's called Grafagno, it's the name of the stream. And when you drink a white muscat like this, the color is always going to be pale yellow and green tinged. You're going to have these delicate little bubbles, and usually the smaller the bubbles are, the better the vinification. If you've got big, round, coarse bubbles, that's the sign of a poor vinification. The single most important thing with white muscat is it's going to remind you of orange blossom and lime. It can remind you of spices like a delicate nutmeg and cinnamon note. But the single most important thing, and of course, you know, white fruit like grapefruit and fresh citrus fruit. But the single most important thing when you drink a Moscato Bianco is it has to have balance. Moscato Bianco, or in this case Moscato d'Asti, is always going to be a sweet wine. It can be very sweet if it doesn't have much acidity. And a lot of Moscato d'Asti wines are not as good as they could be because they're a little deficient in acidity. And if they're deficient in acidity, they become cloying, and they're not much fun to drink. So a good Moscato d'Asti has to have acidity. In other words, that sweetness that hits you on entry has to be balanced with a nice lemony acidity that will keep your palate feeling fresh and not fatigued. That's the same thing, by the way, with Prosecco. A good Prosecco is always balanced. When you drink a Prosecco wine, and Prosecco is the name of the wine because the grape is actually called Galera, but when you drink a Prosecco wine that is tart and thin, that's a bad Prosecco, no matter what they tell you. It's just bad, because a good Prosecco wine is never tart and thin. It's like a sine qua non of a bad Prosecco. Don't believe what they tell you. A good Prosecco always is creamy. It has a very creamy mouthfeel, and it has a beautiful aroma and flavor of white peach. It's very typical of a good Prosecco. In fact, the very famous Bellini cocktail, invented by Arrigo Cipriani, Ari Cipriani in Venice, the true recipe of that cocktail is Prosecco with white peach juice. So if you have a Bellini that's orange or yellow, they're using normal peaches, and that's not the real recipe. And that's because the white peach is a more delicate peach, and it really matches well with Prosecco. So again, Prosecco, when it's good, has this creaminess, and it's not tart and thin. And Moscato d'Asti, when it's good, will always be sweet, but it will be a very delicate sweetness, and it will be counterbalanced by acidity. So this is a 2015, which is reputed to be a good year in Piedmont, but there's a caveat there. Anyways, let's see what this is like. A sweet little bugger. But it's sweet, and entry sweet, but it does have enough acidity at the back there, especially on the finish. It becomes nicely acidic and makes you salivate quite a bit, so you feel like drinking some more. At first it's nice and sweet, but then it becomes fresher and livelier. Moscato Bianco, very difficult grape to grow. They grow a lot of it in Italy. It's one of Italy's most popular grapes, but the fact is that it's thin-skinned, it's easily affected by rot and pests, and so a lot of people don't want to grow white Muscat. Plus it needs some heat. Even though it grows in a cool area like Piedmont, it needs long hang time and it needs to ripen. You also have Moscato Bianco or white Muscat in Alsace, for example. That's where they call it Muscat d'Alsace or Muscat Petit Grain. And there, Alsace, which is a much northern area of Europe, Moscato Bianco really doesn't ripen all that well. It ripens well one every 3 years. So in fact, in Alsace, even though all the labels will read Muscat or will read Muscat d'Alsace, in reality, white Muscat wines in Alsace are always a blend, almost always a blend, of Moscato Bianco, white Muscat, and another Muscat called Muscat Ottonelle. Muscat Ottonelle does not really grow in Italy. It's one of the few grapes that doesn't grow in Italy. Muscat Ottonelle has the advantage of ripening right away. It doesn't need a long growing season. It gives a very fruity, showy wine. So the Alsatian producers, rather than risk making a wine with just Moscato Bianco, they will grow a lot of Muscat Ottonelle. And in fact, most Muscat wines in Alsace are 80-20, 70-30, 50-50, but usually in favor of Ottonelle. So white Muscat, a great grape, known certainly in Roman times, but it's difficult to grow, and it's not as easy to make a wine like this as people are led to believe. This is perfect with fruit cocktails of all kind, you know. It was just made for a fruit cocktail with peach and pineapple and stuff like that. Pineapple tarts, peach tarts. And in Italy, we tend to match it to millefoglie, millefeuille, a very wonderful dessert dish with a flaky, thin pastry shell and leaves with chantilly cream, with a very delicate cream. It's a very typical end of meal wine for us, and at 5, 6, 7% alcohol. The good thing is you can drink as much as you want. You don't have to worry about the cops. Yeah, you know, actually, I had a problem about maybe 5, 6 months ago. I was zipping through a town in northern Italy after a tasting, and I'm very careful. I never get into a car after I've been drinking. Or at least I stopped tasting midway through the meal, so I got time to end. But that time I don't think I was very careful, and I just wanted to get back to the hotel. And as I'm driving through this town, sure enough, you know, the police car stops you with the little thing, their little sign, little round thing with the red thing. And I said, oh my God, I was sweating bullets because my driver's license is gone here. If I gotta blow up this balloon, right? And so the policeman comes out of his car and walks over, and I'm like sweating. And he would talk, talk, talk on my window. God, God, here goes. So I pull down the window, and the policeman says, "Hey." I said, "Hi." And he looks at me, and he says, "Do you have a cell phone?" I go, "What?" He goes, "Do you have a cell phone? Because the battery on mine is dead, and if I don't call my wife, she's going to kill me." "Here, take it. Take it. You want it? It's yours." So he goes off, he phones his wife, and he thanks me when he comes back. Man, I got out of there so fast. I might not have been over the limit, but I was worried. I should have been drinking more Muscat. See, that's the take-home message. Because with 5%, that would have been easy. But unfortunately, I was having all these 14.5% beauties. And anyways, did you like that Muscat? Was it good? Is it more or less... it's a little sweet. You know, the caveat I was going to tell you was, hey, shh. It's a 2015, so it's a hot year. Every time they tell you it's a good year for wine, it always means that it's hot, right? But that's not necessarily good. Not necessarily good for white grapes. So it's a bit more sweet than, you feel that sweetness a bit more, but it has that lovely acidity at the back, which really makes it worthwhile. Okay, now it's going to be a little tougher, because we're going to go to a love or hate wine. You know, Gewürztraminer is just one of those things that you either love or hate. I'm totally in favor of Gewürztraminer. I'm a total believer in open the bottle, fill the bathtub, and go snorkeling. Preferably with your mouth open. I know, I love Gewürz. I never get tired of this stuff. This is actually a very hot-to-trot estate right now. Armin Kubler, clearly a German name, because he's based in Alto Adige. Alto Adige is right below Austria, and Alto Adige is the German part of Italy. You meet a lot of Fritzes and Werners and Harrys up there. And it used to be part of Austria up until 1917. After World War I, that part of Austria became part of Italy, because Italy was on the side of the war that won. And it's also called Südtirol, South Tyrol, or Alto Adige. And it's actually very well integrated. They're happy to be there. We're happy to have them. And also, it's it's the only, no, it's not like, I mean, I come from Canada, right? Quebec, every day of the week, they want to separate, so it's totally different. But in Italy, it's okay. The Alto Adige people are totally fine, and they don't want to leave. So, and we're very happy because that's the only place in Italy that makes Germanic wine. It's the only place in Italy where you're going to grow Kerner and Sylvaner and Müller-Thurgau. Actually, Müller-Thurgau we have in a few other places, but Riesling. Riesling we have essentially only in Piedmont and Lombardy, very little in Friuli Venezia Giulia. So it's great to to be able to drink these wines in Alto Adige, because they're really, they're world-class wines. They really are. Kobler is a really, like I said, up-and-coming estate, very, very young, founded only in 2006 by Armin and his wife Monica with a K. And they make very, very few bottles. I mean, there's only 3,000 bottles a year made of this guy. So really not much to go around. The estate itself has actually been around for a while. I mean, Armin's father bought his first vineyard back in 1958. A vineyard partly planted to Pinot Grigio and to Chardonnay. The Gewürz is made from a single vineyard called Feld, F-E-L-D, and it's a very young vineyard because I think it was planted like in 2001 or 4, in 2004, yeah, I wrote this down, 2004, and it's only located at 200 meters above sea level. And it's mainly on sandy clay soil. Now the only thing that's worth really remembering or taking notice of what I've just said is those 200 meters above sea level. In reality, the vineyard is located at 214 meters above sea level. So even before you drink the wine, what would that tell you that you might encounter with this glass? Well, 200 meters above sea level is roughly 600 feet. And that's not a lot for Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer is a low acid variety. And a lot of the very good Gewürz vineyards in Alto Adige are sitting at 400, 500, 600 meters above sea level. So at distances that are 3 times higher than this one. So right away you'd expect this to be a particularly low acid Gewurz, and maybe a little creamier and richer than most. So let's see, it's got the usual golden tinged color, which is typical of Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer, you know, probably originated as Traminer in Alto Adige. Traminer, ER in German, means of. So of Tramin, and Tramin is a city in Alto Adige, Termeno in Italian. And the general thinking is that Traminer was born in Alto Adige, and then moved to the Upper Rhine area, Alsace, Moselle, and that's where the spicy mutation took place, and Gewürztraminer was born. There's still some controversy over this, but Gewürztraminer as such was probably born up in the Rhine basin. And the main thing about Gewürztraminer is that you've got 2 essential versions of Gewürztraminer. You have a more floral version, and you have a much more opulent tropical fruit version. So Gewürztraminer can remind you of rose petals and grapefruit. It can remind you of mango, papaya, and cinnamon and brown spices. So let's see what kind Kubler wants to make. So I'd say it's more on the floral side, right? And a little herbal. It's certainly not honeyed and mangoish and tropical fruit laden. And when it enters, you see it is a particularly low acid Gewurz. Gewurz is always going to be not especially acidic. This one has only about 4 grams per liter of total acidity, which is low. Gewürztraminer can have usually 5, 5.2, 4.9. That would already give it a bit more lift. And it's got this candied fruit note, some ripe orchard fruit, and it finishes slightly bitter. That's because there isn't any real residual sugar left over here to counterbalance that bitterness. Gewürztraminer is inherently capable of giving you a very bitter wine because it is, by definition, an aromatic grape. And the aromatic nature of Gewürztraminer is due to the presence of molecules such as terpenes and benzenoids that are bitter. So one of the reasons why Alsatian Gewürztraminers are often sweet is the producers leave that sugar on purpose to counterbalance the bitterness. Italian Gewürzes are really dry. We don't really make even off-dry Gewürzes. So we tend to have this very clean finish with a bit of a bitter twinge. For people who find Alsatian Gewürzes a little too opulent and a little too sweet, these are a welcome respite. But you know, if you like the opulent, the rich version of Gewurz, then Italy probably isn't the place for you. And we make very, very few late harvest pure Gewürzes. We usually blend it in with other grapes, and we make sweet wines. So really, Gewurz in Italy is really viewed as a dry wine, a dry white wine. The third wine is instead a very well-known wine. One of Italy's, usually considered one of Italy's 20 best white wines. It's going to be tough to drink after these two, so you might want to take some water or a cracker. Have a cracker, guys. And it's Pieropan Soave. Pieropan is the dean of Italian Soave producers. They've been at it since 1880. They live, the Pieropan family lives in a very beautiful palace called Palazzo Pillici. It's got a very narrow entrance, you know. In fact, if you look at this entrance, it's got a bunch of missing chunks. The rim of the door where the trucks go in, because I'm sure as the trucks turn to go in, they're always hitting the edges, and they're shaving the bricks, the stone bricks with which the building is built. Pieropan really run right now by Leonildo Pieropan and his 2 children. He's just a very talented man and a very nice man. If you've never been to Pieropan and you'd like to visit, by all means call and go, because he's really a great guy. Walking encyclopedia on all things Soave. Soave is the name of the wine. The grape that is used to make Soave is called Garganega, or the gargle grape. Most Soaves are either 90% Garganega or 100% Garganega. The 10% is usually devoted to another local grape called Trebbiano di Soave, although a bunch of producers also add a little Chardonnay in, and that's legal. Trebbiano di Soave is actually a very good grape that is very, very similar to Verdicchio of the Marche. Genetic studies have shown that they're virtually identical. They're not identical, there's some differences. And you gotta consider that when you do genetic analysis of grape varieties, you only study a very small part of the genome. So if the genome that you're studying is already different between two grape varieties, it's really wrong to say that the grapes are identical, because there's the rest of that genome that you haven't even bothered to look at. So you will read everywhere that Trebbiano di Soave and Verdicchio are identical, but that's just fundamentally wrong. What that means in practical terms is that because of these mutations, the two grapes are going to look very similar, they're going to act very similar, and the wines are going to taste very similar. But because they have some mutations, there are going to be very small differences. Now these small differences are so small that you can't pick them up. So for all intents and purposes, a wine made with Trebbiano di Soave and a wine made with Verdicchio are going to be more or less the same, even though precisely speaking, they can't be the same because genetically the two grapes are different. If you take this to an extreme, where the mutations are a lot, then you get to obvious differences, and that would be the case, for example, of the Pinots, the Pinot varieties. You've got Pinot Blanc, Pinot Grigio, and Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc. And they're obviously different grapes, right? Because Pinot Blanc's got white, greenish berries, and it's a white wine. Pinot Gris has rusty colored berries, that's where it takes its name from. It's Grigio or gray because the berries are rusty. And Pinot Noir has blue-black grapes. In fact, if you stand in a vineyard where Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir are growing side by side, if the grapes aren't in an optimal ripening phase, you can't tell them apart. Pinot Gris looks exactly like Pinot Noir. And only when they reach full ripeness, the Pinot Gris remains rusty and the Pinot Noir becomes blue-black. But what is interesting about this is that even though we'd all agree that the three grapes are different and the wines are different, believe it or not, genetically they're identical. Because in the present state of genetic knowledge, the genetics that we look at of all three of those grapes are identical. And that's impossible, right? That's because we only study part of the genome. There's all the rest of it that has enough mutations in there to account for the difference. So when it comes to the Pinots, it's easy to say that the grapes are different. When it comes to Trebbiano di Soave and Verdicchio, those differences aren't marked enough for you to recognize them as different. And that's why you will read that the two grapes are the same, but as hopefully I've been able to explain to you now, they really aren't. The important thing is that this wine that we're drinking is basically one of the very few Soaves that has as much as 30% of Trebbiano di Soave. This is a single vineyard wine by Piero Pan called Calvarino, and it's there on your sheet. Calvarino is 70% Garganega and 30% Trebbiano di Soave. Offhand, I think it's the only Soave I can think of that has that blend. It's a very steep hill. Calvarino is a vineyard that grows very steep, very hard to stand there. It's pure volcanic gray ash soil, so it's a very mineral wine. Calvarino, the name comes from the Italian word calvario, C-A-L-V-A-R-I-O. Calvario means hassle, means it's actually worse than a hassle, it's a real problem. Calvarino, the ino ending would mean that it's a little hassle, but still it's a hassle. And it's because the vineyard is so steep and therefore so hard to work, it's just a hassle to go till the soil and to go pick the grapes. If you know French wines at all, you know that in Pomerol there's a very great chateau called Trotanoy. It's written Trotanoy, T-R-O-T-A-N-O-Y, Trotanoy, but it's actually pronounced Trotanoy, and that comes from the words trop d'ennui, which means too much boredom, but not too much boredom as if it's boring to work there, too difficult and to work, because Trotanois soil are very clay and heavy, and it's really yeoman's work to till those soils. So Calvarino, very much like Trotanois, difficult to work site. This is really one of the best white wines Italy makes. It's not as obvious as some other ones. In fact, Piero Pan makes another single cru wine that people love called La Rocca. La Rocca is another Soave that is 100% Garganega. It's made from the La Rocca vineyard, and that is aged in small barrels, oak barrels. So it certainly has a little bit of a vanilla tinge when young. So La Rocca is much easier to appreciate. It's richer and creamier and softer and lots of vanilla and riper tropical fruit. Well, Calvarino is all about white flowers and fresh citrus and minerals. So it's not as immediately obvious. It has lovely freshness. It's a very balanced wine. It has sneaky concentration, you know, because it's actually a lot more concentrated than it first appears. Has these very nice orchard fruit notes of apple and pear. And it's just a lovely, lovely balanced wine that is easy to underappreciate if you don't pay attention to it. It's also a wine that ages remarkably well. Calvarino is one of Italy's 3 most age-worthy white wines. In general, Garganega allows you for age-worthy white wines. Carricante is a grape that grows on Etna. It's another white grape that allows you to age very well and to make wines that age very well. And Verdicchio in the Marche also is capable of giving you wines that age. If you have a good Verdicchio, one from 2001 or 2000 is still very good today. Most people don't realize that, especially the Reservas. Another grape that would allow you to make wines that age very well, and actually this is an important thing for you to know because I'm sure you know the wine, is a grape called Trebbiano Abruzzese. Trebbiano Abruzzese is the Abruzzo Trebbiano, which is used to make the wine called Trebbiano d'Abruzzo. So again, this is a common mistake. Most people refer to grape and wine with the name of Trebbiano d'Abruzzo, but that's not right. The name of the grape is Trebbiano Abruzzese, the name of the wine is Trebbiano d'Abruzzo. And the tragedy of Trebbiano d'Abruzzo is that there's not that much Trebbiano Abruzzese made. On top of it all, it's always been confused with 3 other grapes. So most vineyards of Trebbiano in Abruzzo are actually planted with these 3 or 4 different varieties. Plus, there's a lot of Trebbiano Toscano also planted in Abruzzo. And that's a major mess because Trebbiano Toscano is truly a lousy grape. It's called Ugni Blanc in France, and nobody makes wine with it there. They use it for distillation and they make cognac. So Trebbiano d'Abruzzo is an unfortunate wine because most producers are using 3 or 4 different grapes, grapes that have different soil requirements, exposure requirements, get harvested at different times. Instead, they're getting harvested all at the same time, and so it's hard to make a really great wine when you're facing all these problems. But you know that Trebbiano Abruzzese has to be a great, great variety because perhaps Italy's single best white wine is a Trebbiano d'Abruzzo made by a guy called Valentini. And Valentini's wines will age easily 40 years. So I go back to what I was saying, Trebbiano Abruzzese is another one of the very few Italian white grape varieties that will allow you to make an age-worthy wine. I've had the 58, the 60, the 61 of Valentini's Trebbiano d'Abruzzo, and they're still great today, and they're 100% Trebbiano Abruzzese, which is a grape that unfortunately is rare. So when you drink a lot of Trebbiano d'Abruzzo, they're really not that great, many of them, because unfortunately they're made with different grape varieties, and it's nobody's fault. It's unfortunate, but because of nursery errors and mistakes made in perfectly good faith, people were planting the wrong grape in their vineyards. Yesterday we did a tasting at the Wine Society, and we tasted the, no, we didn't taste that one. Well, the other really great Trebbiano d'Abruzzo is Tiberio's Fonte Canale. Fonte Canale is a single vineyard from 60-year-old vines, only about 3,000 bottles a year made, and it is pure Trebbiano Abruzzese, and it's a marvelous wine. It's like a Grand Cru Chablis, and it also ages very well. It's only been made for about 4 years. But those are great grapes that can age, that can give you wines that age, and the Garganega grape, with or without Trebbiano di Soave, is another one that allows you to make wines that age. So I hope you like the Soave Calvarino. It's not as obvious as maybe an Oaky Chardonnay or as a Gewurz, but it really is a lovely, lovely wine. The next wine is the Pinot Grigio by Flaibani. Flaibani is a relatively young estate. It was only founded in 1976. The owner was actually involved in journalism and editing books, and then moved to Friuli after the earthquake there, and bought himself about 5 hectares and has small vineyards and makes small amounts of wines. Is not a big producer. The vines are anywhere from 10 to 50 years old and totally organically grown. And this is an example of a Pinot Grigio Ramato. So this is a Pinot Grigio, but as you can tell, it's pink colored. And that's why these wines are called Ramato in Italy. The Ramato refers to rame, which is the Italian word for copper. Rame or copper, because these wines are coppery colored. And clearly, these Pinot Grigios are made by leaving the must in contact with the skins. As I told you, Pinot Grigio is actually a red grape because it's colored, it has a rust color. It's a reddish, rusty color. So if you leave the skins in contact with the must, you're going to end up with this color. You're also going to end up with a slightly tannic mouthfeel, because in the skins, you not only have the pigments, but you also have the tannins. And by leaving the skins in contact with the juice, we're gonna leach out some tannins, so we're gonna end up with a tactile mouthfeel. I haven't tasted it yet, but I'm willing to bet you that it's gonna have a bit of a tannic mouthfeel. Now, boy, yep. Oof. Now, it's a chewy wine, huh? Chewy little bugger. A very good Pinot Grigio, and there are very good Pinot Grigios. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of Plonk sold as Pinot Grigio. It's Italy's best-selling wine. We can't make enough of it. Everybody wants it. I think I said yesterday, and I've said a couple of times, that, you know, last year Italy sold more Pinot Grigio to the U.S. than Italy even makes. So I don't know what we're selling you, but it ain't Pinot Grigio. But God love you, because we need it for our economy. So there's a lot of Trebbiano Toscano that gets passed off as Pinot Grigio. But Pinot Grigio, when it's good, it's great. In Alsace, they make fantastic Pinot Gris. Oregon, for sure. There's some good ones in Canada and Australia, New Zealand. But Pinot Grigio, and there are very good ones from Italy too. The problem is that Pinot Grigio is a victim of its own success, because it's very food friendly, so it goes well with most foods and people like it. It is fruity like Chardonnay, but it's never so fruity that it tastes like a mango fruit cocktail. And it is herbal and grassy like Sauvignon, but it's never so grassy that you feel like you've turned into a cow and you're munching on grass. So it falls right in between Chardonnay and Sauvignon and offers the best of both worlds, and people love it. This Ramato technique is actually an old technique that was used centuries ago in Friuli, and it's become popular now, and there's about 10 or 12 producers who are making Pinot Grigio like this in Italy. And when it is this pink, you can sometimes pick up a note of strawberry. A Pinot Grigio, a good one, will always remind you of pear. That's really the main thing with Pinot Grigio. Yellow apples, like Golden Delicious apples, pear for sure. Now, the next level would be notes of strawberry, and that shouldn't be surprising because, again, Pinot Grigio is a red grape, so it should remind you of strawberries. But that really only happens with the very low-yielding plants in Alsace. In Alsace, Pinot Gris will often smell even like strawberry syrup, and that doesn't happen as much in Italy because our yields are much, much higher. One of the reasons why our yields are much, much higher in Italy is not just because of greed, but because of the weather. In Friuli, it actually rains quite a bit. And Pinot Gris is a thin-skinned variety, often with a very tightly packed bunch, and it rots. It's a rot magnet. So it's one of the reasons why we don't make late harvest wines in Italy from Pinot Grigio. They make fantastic late harvests and Selezione Grenoble wines, sweet wines in Alsace, but we tend not to do that in Italy. That's actually pretty good. Do you like that Pinot Grigio Ramato, or you think it's off kilter? Who likes it? Raise your hand. Yeah, actually, it's a good one, you know, because it has a very nice fruitiness, has a very nice sweetness, and then it's got this tannic kick, which really cleanses your palate, and it's got also nice acidity. Yeah.
I think it would do very well with food.
Yeah. You see, that's the great thing about Italian wine in general, you know, as a sine qua non, Italy's wines tend to be all high in acid, and they tend to be all medium-bodied. Even some of our bigger red wines like Barolo and Brunello are very high in acidity. So except for things like Amarone, most of our wines are very food-friendly. Only recently, because of the fad and the urge to get very high scores from certain magazines, some producers have turned to making much higher, much sweeter, rounder, low acid wines, but that's not really typical of Italy. You know, Italy is a country that has over 400 different cheeses. It has over 450 different salumi, prosciuttos, and so you really want wines that have acidity and freshness and tannins and light bodies to wash all that stuff down. So it's true. I mean, it's a good food wine, and it should be, because most Italian wines are meant to go with food. You know, we've never really viewed them as things to be drunk on their own. Okay, well, the next wine is the first of our reds, and it's the estate called La Salcetta. And actually, I get to take a break. I think I'll go have a coffee, because we have the owner of the estate here with us. Enrico, vieni. This is the owner, and it's in the Val d'Arno. The Val d'Arno, you know, is a very historically famous part of Tuscany, between Florence, Siena, and Arezzo. Maybe it's not as well known today as Chianti-Classico or Montalcino or stuff like that, but already back in 1716, the Archduke Cosimo III Medici came with one of the very first zonations or terroir maps in history, and he decreed that the 4 greatest winemaking areas of Tuscany included Val d'Arno. So it's a very high quality area that is going to be better known in the future. Prego.
Yes, thank you. Oh, very bad. I apologize for my English.
Bravo.
Yes, the Val d'Arno was a really historical land for the grape, for the wine. This year is the 3centenary of Band of Cosimo. It's a very important milestone for Tuscany, and I think for Italy. It's very interesting.
Are you going to have a big party?
Yes, in September. You are invited.
Okay, guys, come up here later and get his card. Big party in September. Free booze.
And is the first rule, the first disciplinare of the history, I think.
Yeah. Actually, we tend to gloss over that because we don't want to. But you know, everybody talks about the 1855 classification in Bordeaux and things like that. But in reality, the Edict of Cosimo Medici is really one of the very first, if not the first, modern day zonation study of the best winemaking areas of a region.
Well, in any case, I just thank you for your words about Phoebe.
Yeah, I believe in it.
It's very important for us to your choice, your selection, to explain the Italian artisanal wine with Phoebe wine. It is approved for us. Thank you very much about that. But I think it's really important. Yeah, really true.
True.
Because I don't have other word to plus the word of Jan about our activities. And what is most important for us is we are in the vineyard. we stay in the vineyard, we stay in the cellar, and sometimes we stay in New York. But
It's a big vineyard.
yeah, it's very tough. And the control of our part, it's very different job. Stay in vineyard, stay in cellar, and stay in New York City. It's really very different. It's not easy to merge this different job in one person, because we are one person. Every 1,000 wine grower, independent wine grower, normally is one person. Sometimes with children, sometimes with women, but usually one person. It's very important this link with all of phases of our life, of our activities. Yes. About La Salcetta, just a few words before your appreciated words. Very small estate, organic.
How many hectares?
3 hectares more or less.
3 hectares?
3
Wow.
hectares. Now we launch, because you show some particularity about our country. Now we show a project, very interesting project, about one new blanc grape named Orpicchio.
Orpicchio, yeah.
Yeah. 2 wine in the region, just 2 wine, because what disappeared in the past. Just 2 wine. We improved. We tried to improve this grape, and we start to plant the Orpicchio this year. Maybe in the next year you will have some important winery like Petrolo or Tenuta Sette Ponti, and some smaller like La Salcetta, and to drink this particular grape. It's typical. It's between the Pinot Blanc and it's right at Pinot Blanc. It's very just in Valdarno.
So, just in case you don't, Orpicchio is a native white grape of Italy. It basically disappeared. There's no pure bottling of Orpicchio right now. Bandinelli worked a lot on it at the University of Florence. A researcher called Bandinelli, Roberto Bandinelli, has worked on it a lot. But maybe next year we'll have the first pure example, mono-variety of Orpicchio, and that's exciting. Your estate, organically grown grapes?
Organic.
And quante bottiglie fai l'anno?
It's depend of the year, 10,000, 12,000.
So 10 or 12,000 bottles a year.
Yeah.
And this is your Sangiovese?
Yeah, it's a pure Sangiovese, 100% Sangiovese. Is a cru. It's the selected Sangiovese coming from just one vineyard. And
Si chiama?
Ruschietto.
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 It's on his website. Ruschietto. It's not written there, I think, on your thing. Ruschietto. 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 And it's a pure 100% Sangiovese, so it's his most important wine.
It's vintage 2011, 2012. 2012. I don't use wood to refine the wine. I prefer just the tank. It's a choice. I respect other choice.
So no.
But this is the particularity of the wine. And I hope you appreciate it.
Grazie. Thank you very much. Grazie. Thank you. Ian. So this is Sangiovese. The main thing with Sangiovese, I always stress, if you look at the color of this wine, it is red. And remember that a pure Sangiovese, a mono variety Sangiovese wine, 100% Sangiovese, cannot ever be inky black. It's a physical impossibility. So Brunello e Montalcino, which is also 100% Sangiovese, cannot be black. The reason for that is there are ways that you can turn up the color or kick it up a notch in the winery, but in reality it's impossible to turn Sangiovese, not just black, even purple is a stretch. And that is because, you know, we have 5 basic pigments in grape skins. They're the same grape pigments in all grapes. And what changes is the concentrations of each of the 5 and the ratios. And Sangiovese has 2 of these 5 pigments in very large numbers, roughly 40% of the total, that are called pionin and cyanin. And those are 2 pigments that oxidize very easily, break down and turn garnet orange in color. So Sangiovese wines cannot be inky black because they don't have the pigments to make them inky black. They actually have pigments that break down and give you an orangey color even when they're young wines. Doesn't mean they can't age, and in fact Sangiovese wines age very, very well. Brunello is, for example, Italy's longest lived wines. Biondi Santi, I think you all know, has bottles still in a cellar from 1881 and 1898. So, and they're still very drinkable. So a good Sangiovese will not only never be black, it will always be red or dark red or deep red, but red. It will always smell of sour red cherries and red berries like red currant, strawberries if it's a little riper, and has a very typical perfume of violets. It's a very floral wine usually, you know, different grapes have different floral expressions. Nebbiolo and therefore Barolo and Barbaresco, they will smell of roses, red roses. Grignolino, I did the tasting earlier this morning on Grignolino. It's a grape from Piedmont. Actually has a hint of geranium. And in the case of Sangiovese, the flower is violet. Has a strong smell of violet. It's very typical of Sangiovese. And it also smells and tastes of licorice. So red berries, sour red cherry, licorice, violet, black tea. And when it gets older, when it ages, it will remind you of leather and underbrush. And so Sangiovese is recognizable based on those parameters. No real chocolate or coffee aromas or flavor, no bell pepper in Sangiovese, unless it's really not ripe. Cool. Now for something completely different, you have the Morella Primitivo Old Vines. Morella Primitivo Old Vines is literally what it says. It's made from 80, 75-year-old vines. And Primitivo, you all know, is Zinfandel. And in reality, both of them are Tribigrad, which is a grape that grows in Croatia. So after many years of confusion and diatribe, we know that Zinfandel and Primitivo are in fact Croatian in origin. Primitivo, the name translates to primitive, has this name not because it's a primitive grape and not because it gives you rustic or primitive wines or uncouth wines. It's called Primitivo because it ripens very early. Primitivo is one of the earliest harvested red grapes in Italy. It's usually harvested already in August, and basically no red wine grape gets harvested then. Primitivo in Italy tends to be a bit more herbal than Zinfandel in the States. A lot of tobacco in Italian Primitivos. Some can be much riper and give you that very unctuous, marmalade-y sort of red fruit that a lot of great California Zinfandels can exude in spades. But in Italy, besides that, you also get a strong herbal and tobacco kick. And here, you certainly get that sort of moss, underbrushy, herbal note, spicy also, and a hint of this dark red cherry that is very, very ripe. Yeah, almost like a liqueur. And more or less the same on the mouth. Very good acidity, fresh. I think it's a little hollow on the finish, no? But it's a wine that has had tremendous success. Like I said, they're 75, 80-year-old bush vines that grow on these red clay and sandy soils where Primitivo does very, very well. It's aged in small French oak barrels and stays 14 months there. I might have taken it out a few months earlier. But it's a very popular wine. It's not particularly expensive, and it's very fruity and will match well with hearty stews and foods. And a lot of people really love Morella's wines. I can certainly see why. The second last wine is maybe the most famous wine in this tasting. I mean by wine, I mean as a category. Soave, I guess, is very famous, and Moscato d'Asti is very famous. This is an Amarone. The full name of Amarone is actually Amarone della Valpolicella. Valpolicella is the area near Verona where Amarone is made. It's historically very famously linked to wine production. In fact, Valpolicella is derived from a Latin word called polis cellae, many cellars. Polis, many, cellae, cellars, because it's an area that always had a lot of wine cellars and wine estates already in Roman times. So wine has always been made in the area of Verona. Amarone is one of Italy's most famous wines, certainly one of Italy's biggest wines. It is also, however, a young wine, because Amarone was really only made at the end of the 1950s. Before, the red wine of the area was a sweet red wine called a Recioto. And there's two Reciotos. There's the Recioto della Valpolicella, which is the red one, and there's the Recioto di Soave, which is the white one, because in Soave they make a sweet white wine. There's also another Recioto called di Gambellara. Gambellara is an area near Soave, also based on the Garganega grape. And Gambellara wines are very Soave-like. And they also make a sweet wine there called Recioto di Gambellara. So 3 Reciotos in Italy, and 2 are white and 1 is red. But anyways, it's the Recioto della Valpolicella, the sweet red wine. That was the typical red wine of the Verona area. And then in the late 50s, at a winery, a couple of barrels were forgotten by the winemaker. And he just forgot about them. So the yeasts were still alive, and they just kept munching. And they finished up all the sugar, and they produced a lot more alcohol. And when the people went and realized that they'd forgotten the barrels and they tasted it, they got this big, massive, dry red wine out of it. And the original name for this wine was Recioto Scapà, the Recioto Scappato, which means the Recioto that had escaped. and then the other take was that it was not sweet, therefore it was almost amaro, bitter, although it's not bitter, but it's not sweet. And since it's a big, big fat wine, one is the ending, and it becomes Amarone, A fazzo in Italian would be called a ciccione. So the one ending. Ino is small, right? So grignolino, the little one. One means bigger, portly. So this is an Amarone della Valpolicella. It is by the producer La Bionda, and it's called Ravazzol, is the name of the wine. It's made in really the heart of the Valpolicella Classico production zone, near the town of Marano. There's 4 valleys that are associated with Amarone Classico production. And Marano is the one that usually gives you the earliest maturing, easiest to approach it, the more accessible Amarones early, because it's a valley that is more open than the other ones, sees a lot more sun, it's a little bit warmer microclimate. This is a blend of 3 grapes. Amarone is always a blend of 3 or 4 grapes. In this case, it's 60% Corvina, 20% Corvinone, and 20% Rondinella. Corvina, Corvinone, and Rondinella. Corvinone, again, the one ending. It is the big Corvina. Corvina is a lovely grape, but has no tannins. So in order to make an important red wine, you got to give it some tannin, and that's why they blend in Corvinone, which, as the name implies, gives you a bigger, more structured wine. And most Amarones are blends of Corvina and Corvinone. Then most Amarones will have 10, 20, or 30% Rondinella. Rondinella is a grape that, depending who you believe, is used either because it's a very good producer and therefore never leaves you without any wine. Others say that it's more than that, it adds a nice herbal touch that makes the wine more complex. So this is actually a blend of only 3 grapes. Sometimes in Amarone they will stick a 4th in called Molinara. Molinara is a pink-hued grape that gives a very dilute red wine. And people like to use Molinara and Amarone because if not with Amarone, you run the risk of making a super huge, super big, super fleshy red wine, very alcoholic. So Molinara helps gentrify it a bit. Or some people will use Ozeleta. Ozeleta is another rare native grape that's very, very tannic. And it's a little bit like Cabernet Sauvignon in what it does. And people who want to make an even bigger, sturdier Amarone will use 5 or 10% Ozeleta. You can't use a lot of Ozeleta because Ozeleta is a grape that has small berries, not much juice, and even has more pips than most grapes. So the berries are already small, plus it has more pips, so there's very little juice. And that's a big problem in Amarone because Amarone, as you all know, is made by air drying grapes. And what they do is they take the grapes, they harvest them maybe in September or October, and then they leave them to dry, either on straw mats or bamboo canes, or now in plastic shelves because they're more hygienic and the EU wants that. And these dry, right? So you lose water by evaporation. And if you lose water by evaporation, you're also going to make less wine. And if you start with a grape that doesn't have much juice to begin with, clearly the evaporation process is going to be a big, big problem. So Ozeleta is not a grape that is used a lot. It is used to make Amarone, but only in about as much 5 or 10%. Anyways, this is all Corvina, Corvinone, and Rondinella. It's actually air dried for roughly 3.5 months because they press these grapes in January or February. They'll pick them as early as September. And by then, the grapes have lost about 40% of their weight by volume. So they've lost about 40% of their water. So you're going to make 40% less wine, and that right away tells you that Amarone is going to be an expensive wine. Amarone, when properly made, is made from these air-dried grapes that have really shriveled up. You're going to make a lot less wine, and therefore it's going to be a costly wine. I would tell you that a very inexpensive Amarone is almost a contradiction in terms, you know. Hard to make a good Amarone that's very cheap. It's just, you know, hard to believe. A good Amarone will be rich, round, voluptuous even, may have a hint of residual sweetness. They're always high alcohol wines, easily have 16, 17%. Some are at 15.5, but very rarely below that. I got this beautiful note of red cherries macerated in alcohol, you know, like almost like a red cherry jam. This is a very delicate spiciness. It's a nice cinnamon touch on the finish. It's very fresh. Has a nice lively acidity. Touch of heat there on the finish. But it's a lovely wine. It's actually a very easy to take Amarone. Some of them are so thick that it's really like your gums are glued together. Do you like that Amarone? Is it good? It's civilized Amarone, I think, you know? It's not exaggerated. And the last wine, is by Tenuta Grillo. It's the most difficult wine in this tasting. Tenuta Grillo is very, very hardcore, organic, biodynamic, really into the no sulfur, or very little sulfur. This is a Freisa mainly. The estate is found in the Monferrato, which is in Piedmont, near the town of Alessandria. It's not that far, it's about an hour from Turin. So it's smack dab in Piedmont. This is mainly Freisa. There's a little Dolcetto, there's a little Merlot, and there's a little Barbera in here. Freisa is a beautiful grape that will smell of roses and have lots of very bright acidity. It goes great with salumis and prosciuttos of all kinds. The estate has about 17 acres under vine. It's a bit bigger than that. The wine is aged anywhere from 12 to 24 months in oak. But you can see what happens when you don't use sulfur on the nose. You have a very recognizable low sulfur aroma that, you know, not everybody likes. I think that it's got this earthy character that is, you know, a taste and an aroma that people really like and some don't like at all. It's actually brighter and fresher in the mouth and less earthy. And it's got lovely acidity and finish is zippy and bright. For me, honestly, I gotta tell you the truth, it's an aroma profile I don't really particularly like. But it's, you know, just a matter of, I guess, different strokes for different folks. And I love Fresa. It smells of red roses. It smells of sour red cherries and strawberries. In fact, Fresa, the name comes from fraseatum or strawberry. So I love that. So in this version, it's a little bit more difficult to pick all that up. But I can tell you that some of my best friends in the world drink these wines all the time and love them. I've got a very good friend who's very knowledgeable about wine, and he only drinks wines that are made with low sulfur, and he loves these aromas and he just can't get enough. So it's, again, a matter, I guess, of different strokes for different folks. So anyways, that's it. I hope you had a good time. There's a lot of information here, but you had a lot of different wines. And which is one that you like best? Here, let me ask you. I'm interested. I always do this. Think of 2 wines you liked, okay? Because there are only 8, so think of 2 wines, and let's vote on the 2. Granted, some of these wines are very different one from the other, so it's apples and oranges, but let's see what you think. Think through the wines and pick for 2. Who votes for the Sirocco? Who votes for the Moscato? Okay. Who votes for the Kobler Gewurz? Yeah, that was a little tough. Who votes for the Piero Pan Soave? Okay. Who votes for the Pinot Grigio? That's copyrighted. You can't laugh like that. Just kidding. Alrighty. La Salceta, Valdarno. Hey, they're being nice to you. Oh, I'm kidding. Very good wine. Morella, the Primitivo, the Primitivo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And then we have La Bionda Amarone. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And the last one, Pecora Nera. The one. Yeah, see, it's a polarizing wine. All right, so we have. Pretty easy. They're one after another here. So the bronze medal, 3rd place goes to, I don't have a trumpet, so the Pinot Grigio, the Ramato by Flaibani. So wine number 4 went very well. Wine number 5, La Salceta, is the silver medal winner. 2nd place for La Salceta, the Valdarno di Sopra, Ruschietto, very good. And the winner is Piero Pan, the Calvarino Soave. And it's good to see that, because that's not an easy wine, you know, it doesn't have any of that soft oak, but I'm glad you liked it. And it was very good tasting. I like some of the wines that we did. And I hope you had a good time. I hope you enjoyed it. Very nice to meet all of you. And cheers. So walk safely. Oh, very good.